The casserole hadn't even cooled. I remember that detail because I'd been so proud of it. Hand-peeled potatoes cream from the market down on Willow Street, baked slow and steady in the same dish my grandmother used. I still remember the shape of the brown edges curling at the corners just the way she liked it. It was my first dinner in the house I bought myself. Not rented, not borrowed, not a hand-me-down from someone else's idea of where I belonged. I saved for 5 years, cut every extra, packed my own lunch through 2 promotions. I did everything the right way, quietly, carefully. And now I was hosting the very people who always doubted I could. My parents were due at 6. I set the table with cloth napkins and the plates I'd gotten on clearance from a little antique shop outside of Corvallis, the blue ones with tiny hand-painted birds on the rim. Each seat had a name card, simple, printed on cardstock and laminated at work on my break. I placed Dad at the head, Mom to his right, and Marla, my older sister, across from me like it was some soft-lit truce I'd arranged after a war we never declared. I even lit candles, cinnamon and pine. Just enough to make the place feel like home, not like a showroom. By 6:20, I had rechecked everything 3 times. The roast was resting, the salad was crisp, and my skirt, which I hardly ever wore, was freshly steamed. I remember smoothing it down more than once, the way nervous hands do when there's nothing else left to fix. At 6:32, tires crunched over gravel outside. My heart kicked a little. The first to step inside was Marla. She didn't knock, just opened the door and said, "Smells like food," without looking at me. She wore those suede boots she always bragged about, expensive, impractical. They tracked faint dust over the floors I'd mopped that morning. Dad followed. He gave a nod, not quite a greeting. His eyes didn't land on me, but rather moved across the crown, molding the ceiling corners, the family photo above the mantel, like he was inspecting a rental. "This place has good bones," he said eventually. "Feels like it should belong to everyone." I laughed, though I didn't find it funny. "It's cozy, I think." Mom entered last. She didn't speak. Her fingers grazed the picture frame on the mantel, one of us from when I was 10. Her eyes lingered on it like it was unfamiliar. We sat. The silverware clinked lightly. The salad remained untouched. Marla scrolled through her phone under the table. Dad asked how I could afford hardwood floors. He said it not like a compliment, but a suspicion. "You know," he added, "a house this size is a lot for one person." "It's manageable," I said, and took a sip of wine I no longer wanted. No one asked about my promotion. By the time dessert came, a warm apple crumble with oat topping, I was nearly desperate for someone to say anything kind. I remember smiling too hard. I told them the crust was homemade. I said it twice. Dad didn't respond. He folded his napkin slowly, precisely like a ritual. Then he looked at me finally, and I saw something shift in his jaw. I recognized it. I'd seen it when I asked to apply for a college out of state, when I bought my first car without calling for permission. "We've discussed it," he said. "This house should come back to the family." I blinked. "I'm sorry." What? Mom nodded, eyes fixed on the wall. "You've done well, Celeste, but it's too much house for someone like you. It's time to refocus." My hands trembled under the table. Marla leaned back, arms crossed. "It's not personal," she said. Then she stood, and when she came back, she was holding my suitcase. The green one I'd used when I moved to college. It was already packed. "We gathered your essentials," she added, just to make things smoother. I tried to speak. My mouth wouldn't open. My voice curled up inside my chest and refused to come out. "I'm the legal owner," I whispered finally. Dad's smile was thin. "We'll sort that." No one raised their voice. No one cried. But something far louder had already happened. I picked up my phone and keys and laid them gently on the table right next to my untouched wine glass. Then I walked out. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for October. The suitcase thumped in the back of my trunk as I drove with no destination in mind. Each turn on the road echoed like a question I hadn't prepared to answer. I didn't know it then, but the real theft didn't happen that night. It started long before the casserole cooled. I didn't drive far. I couldn't. 10, maybe 12 miles outside of Harbor Falls, I pulled into a small gas station, the kind that still sold disposable cameras and cinnamon air fresheners hanging behind the counter. The overhead light flickered like it was tired of staying on. I parked under it, engine off, hands still locked around the steering wheel as if I needed it to anchor me to something solid. The suitcase thudded quietly with each movement, a dull reminder in the trunk. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. My voice was quieter than I expected. "This is Celeste." A pause, then a voice, cheerful, too cheerful. "Hi, Ms. Whitmore, this is Chelsea from Cascade State Mortgage. I'm calling to confirm a request that came through this weekend regarding changes to your mortgage account." My stomach tightened. "What kind of changes?" "Well," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "There was a request to add 2 co-borrowers to your existing loan and to update the primary contact to someone named Marla Whitmore. The submission raised some red flags on our end, mostly because it didn't come through the secure portal and it didn't match your typical access pattern." My heart was pounding now, but my voice stayed even. "I didn't authorize any changes. I haven't shared access with anyone." Another pause. "That's what we figured," she said. "We haven't processed anything. You're still listed as the sole legal owner, no co-borrowers, no secondary contacts. But for your protection, we've temporarily locked the account and logged the attempted change." My mouth was dry. "Do you have the names they used?" "Yes. Edward and Marla Whitmore." I didn't respond right away. It wasn't shock that kept me quiet. It was the strange, steady realization that I wasn't surprised. I thanked her requested written documentation and ended the call. The car was silent again, except for the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. I stared out at the empty parking lot, my reflection faint in the windshield. They weren't reacting to anything. They had been planning this. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment family dysfunction. It was a blueprint, a long one. And I, trying to please them, trying to serve casserole and earn a smile, had walked right into it. I reached for my phone again, not to call anyone, but to scroll through old photos. Ones taken just weeks ago. Me standing on the porch with the sold sign holding keys, smiling like I believed the house was mine. It was mine. Still was. But they didn't think I'd fight for it, and they certainly didn't think I'd document everything. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call had already changed the outcome. Because now I wasn't confused. I was aware. And awareness, I would learn, is the first real weapon. It was still early the next morning when I drove back toward my house. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd dozed off in the car for maybe an hour before the cold in my spine reminded me I was no longer welcome in the place I paid for. But I needed something, papers, chargers, even just a sweater. Something familiar. As I pulled onto my street, the sun was just starting to rise. The houses on my block were lit with soft porch lights, windows framed with curtains that hadn't changed overnight. But mine was different. The porch light had been swapped. The warm amber bulb I'd chosen was now a sterile white-blue glow that felt more like a dentist's office than a home. The potted rosemary I'd grown from seed was gone. In its place was a plastic fern in a chipped planter I'd never seen before. I parked across the street and sat for a moment just looking. The curtains were different. The blinds were drawn tightly like the house itself was hiding something. I walked up slowly, heart heavy but hands steady. I still had my copy of the key. I hadn't dared try it yesterday. I slipped it into the lock. It didn't turn. No resistance, no clunk. Just a quiet finality, like the lock no longer recognized me. I pulled the key out and stared at it, and then the door opened. A woman I didn't know stood in the threshold barefoot, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She couldn't have been more than 22. She looked me up and down with the kind of glance you use on someone who's selling magazines door to door. "Can I help you?" I swallowed. "This is my house." She raised an eyebrow. "You're Celeste?" I nodded. Her face didn't change. "They told me you wouldn't be back." "Who told you Marla and Edward said you left voluntarily? That you were having stability issues?" I felt my stomach knot, not in surprise, but in the confirmation of what I already suspected. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the hallway. My hallway. But not mine anymore. The photo wall had changed. Gone were the framed prints of Oregon coastlines I'd taken during solo hikes. In their place were stock photos of flower fields and a canvas with a quote about family. A quote I didn't believe. "I'm going to need you to leave," the girl said. I was told not to let anyone in. I stepped back without a word. There was no point in arguing with someone who wasn't even part of the play. They were just reading the script they were handed. As I turned to walk away, my heels tapped softly against the concrete, too loud in the early morning hush. Across the street, Mrs. Denham was walking her spaniel bundled in a fleece robe. "Morning, Celeste," she called, like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't just been shut out of my own life. I nodded. That was all I could manage. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment before pulling away. Inside, it was so quiet, it almost hurt. That stranger in the doorway wasn't the problem. She was just a symptom. The real issue was behind her behind the door that no longer opened for me. The problem was how easily they'd rewritten my place in the story, and how quietly the world was prepared to let them. I spent that night on Raina's couch. She didn't ask for details, not at first. She just made a pot of peppermint tea, the kind I used to keep in my kitchen, and left it on the side table next to a folded blanket. "I'm here when you're ready," she said simply. I wasn't ready yet, but I wasn't lost either. By midnight, the apartment had gone quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat cross-legged under the throw blanket laptop open on my knees. I hadn't touched most of my old cloud folders in months. They were mostly filled with paperwork, scanned documents from closing day tax records, insurance confirmations. Things I filed out of obligation, not urgency. But one folder caught my eye. Interior cam backups. I had nearly forgotten it existed. The cameras were my idea back when I first moved in, not for security exactly, but peace of mind. A couple small motion-activated lenses tucked near the front hallway and office enough to monitor for deliveries or in case someone tripped the breaker while I was away. They were synced to my cloud set to auto-upload clips when triggered. I hadn't reviewed them since early fall. But now? I clicked. The first video was time-stamped 2 days before the dinner. It opened with a quiet shot of the hallway, then movement. Marla standing in my office, casually opening drawers, not rifling, not searching, just calmly removing files, flipping through them, placing them in a box already labeled in her handwriting. Another clip, my mother Diane removing my framed degree from the wall, tucking it under her arm. She took a moment to smooth the dust from the now empty space. Then my father. Edward entered last, sat at my desk like he owned it. He leaned back in my chair, tested the tilt, then reached behind the monitor and unplugged the router. In his hand, he held a new device wrapped in masking tape. On it, in faded marker, was written Whitmore, Maine. They weren't trespassing. They were settling in, replacing the things I had chosen with the things they thought fit better. No panic, no rush. Just deliberate motion. Like the house had already been reassigned in their minds, and my presence at the dinner was merely a formality. I sat back, pulse thudding low behind my ribs. They hadn't expected me to notice. They didn't think I'd still have access. They thought I'd given up the moment I left the key on the table. And honestly, for a moment, I almost had. But not now. I started downloading clips, one by one. I renamed them by timestamp and saved them into a new folder. They took it. At the bottom of the folder, tucked beneath a string of footage files, was a voicemail. I didn't remember saving it. It was dated 9 days before the dinner. I hit play. Marla's voice came through flat and clear. "Once she's out, change the locks. Don't let her back in. Not even for the photo albums. She'll call a lawyer, sure, but it won't stick. This is a family matter. Judges don't touch it." My throat tightened. She wasn't even angry, just efficient. Like this was an event to be managed, like I was clutter to be boxed and removed. I sat with the silence after the recording ended. Let it settle. Then I copied the voicemail, attached the first 3 video files, and emailed them to myself and to a new contact folder labeled Legal. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this: I hadn't left. They had simply begun moving in before I realized I was being moved out. The next morning, I woke to Raina sitting at her tiny kitchen table, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a small legal pad filled with names and numbers. She looked up when I entered. "You need a lawyer. Not just for the house. This is bigger now." I nodded. I knew she was right. She made a call before breakfast. By 9, we had an appointment with Joanna Kerr, a civil litigation attorney in downtown Harbor Falls. I remembered the name from a neighbor's divorce, quiet, thorough, not the type who showed up in court with a loud tie and an ego. Joanna's office was small but neat, with a row of green folders stacked with alarming symmetry. Her handshake was dry and direct. "I specialize in property disputes," she said, sliding a notepad between us. "But more often than not, the worst ones involve people with the same last name." She let that hang for a moment before continuing. I pulled out the folder I'd started the videos, the voicemail copies of my mortgage documents and deed. She scanned them quickly, her face unreadable. "This is strong," she said. "But we'll need more." I knew what she meant, and I already knew where to look. That night, back at Raina's, I opened my email archive. Years of threads and attachments. most forgotten until I began using the search bar like a scalpel. Subject line, "Can you send over your W-2 real quick?" from Edward Whitmore. Date February 2 years ago. I remembered it. I was filing taxes late and had asked my dad if his accountant still did individual returns. He said yes, just send the documents. Another from Marla, "Need your SSN for the insurance beneficiary forms just to speed things up." At the time, it hadn't seemed strange. They were family. I'd trusted the hands reaching out to help me steady my life. Now, I saw it differently. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were slowly assembling a version of me they could control on paper. Raina, I called from across the living room. "Can you check something for me?" She joined me on the couch, laptop balanced on her knees. "Check your credit report," she said without needing to ask why. It took me 2 tries to remember my password. When the report loaded, I felt my throat go dry. 2 new inquiries. One from a major department store I hadn't shopped at in over a decade. Another from a credit card company I'd never applied to. Both submitted within the past week. Both linked to an IP address from my parents' house. I turned to Raina. She was already frowning. "This is financial fraud," she said. "This isn't emotional anymore. It's criminal." I sat very still, as if even breathing too loudly might make it worse. Joanna called that evening. I forwarded everything. The emails, the report, the application attempts. "We're filing," she said. "Emergency petition, restraining order. Lock your credit. From this point forward, don't speak with them directly. Every word goes through me." I closed my laptop and leaned back. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about proof. They'd counted on me staying quiet, staying small, but they forgot I kept receipts. The courthouse in Harbor Falls was built in 1911, brick, limestone, and symmetry. I'd passed it dozens of times and never thought I'd walk in through the front doors as anything other than a taxpayer. But on Thursday morning, I stepped through security with Joanna on my left and Raina trailing quietly behind. I carried nothing but a manila folder and my name. We waited outside the courtroom while the previous case was called. Divorce. Something about vehicles and visitation. Voices behind the double doors rose, then fell again. I pressed my palms together on my lap, not to pray, just to stop them from shaking. "This isn't about drama," Joanna said under her breath. "We're here for truth. Let them perform. We'll present." When our case was called, we entered quietly. The courtroom was cold in a way that didn't come from the air, more like a stillness that demanded you choose your words carefully or not at all. My parents sat at the defendant table. My father, Edward, wore a suit that didn't fit quite the way it used to. My mother, Diane, was rigid beside him. Marla was seated apart, arms crossed, jaw-locked, hair pulled into a bun that said control more than style. They didn't look at me. Joanna began with documentation. She presented the mortgage papers, the deed, the dated payoff statements. Then the videos, silent but devastating, my father replacing the router, my mother removing framed photos, Marla boxing files. Then came the voicemail. The courtroom remained quiet as Marla's voice echoed from the speaker. "Once she's out, change the locks. Don't let her back in. Not even for the photo albums. Not angry. Not panicked. Just calculated." Joanna let it sit in the room before continuing. When it was their turn, my father stood first. "We were trying to protect what we built," he said. "This house was always meant for the family. We supported Celeste for years. Her name might be on the deed, but that was never the spirit of it." Joanna interrupted him politely but firmly. "Mr. Whitmore, do you deny submitting false ownership claims to Cascade State Mortgage?" "I deny any criminal intent," he replied, voice tight. If she had just listened, none of this would have happened. The judge glanced over her glasses, her face unreadable. Then came Marla. She stood, cleared her throat. "I was only trying to help manage the property," she said. "Celeste doesn't even like hosting. It was too much house for her. She gets overwhelmed." Joanna pulled a still frame from one of the videos, Marla removing my labeled folders, tucking them into a box with her initials on the side. The judge looked up. "You believed the home was yours?" Marla hesitated. "I believed it was shared responsibility." "You're not on the deed," the judge said. "Are you?" "No." My turn came last. I walked slowly to the stand, took the oath, sat. I didn't read a statement. I didn't bring notes. I looked directly at the judge and said, "I bought that house alone. I paid every installment, handled every repair, chose every piece of furniture. They didn't just enter without permission, they began erasing me before I even left. I paused. My father replaced my internet. My sister packed my files. My mother removed my photographs, and when I resisted, they called me unstable. I let the silence linger. They didn't just try to take my house. They tried to write me out of the life I built inside it. The judge didn't speak immediately. She flipped through her notes, read something on her screen. Then finally, this court finds that Ms. Celeste Whitmore is the sole legal owner of the property in question. Furthermore, we find sufficient grounds to uphold the temporary restraining order and open formal inquiry into suspected financial misconduct and identity fraud. Edward inhaled sharply. Marla looked at the floor. My mother didn't move at all. I didn't react. Not in that room. Outside, Raina was waiting with coffee in a paper cup and an umbrella she didn't need. The sun was sharp and steady overhead. "How do you feel?" she asked. I looked down at the courthouse steps. My shoes were planted. My voice steady. "I feel real." She smiled. Later that afternoon, I opened the email from Joanna confirming the county clerk had updated the deed. My name, my signature, my home. I closed my laptop and sat by the window in Raina's guest room, watching the trees sway outside like they were nodding in quiet agreement. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. And piece by piece, it was working. The key turned harder than I remembered. It took 2 full tries and a firm grip before the lock finally gave way, like the house itself wasn't sure whether to let me in. I stepped into silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that made you listen harder than you meant to. The curtains were stiff. The air held no scent. The soft eucalyptus I used to keep near the entryway had been replaced with something sharper, lavender plugins, the kind Marla liked. Artificial. Unwelcome. I didn't walk room to room. Not yet. I stood in the foyer for several long minutes, letting my eyes adjust to the changes. My grandmother's ceramic vase was gone from the console table. In its place, a cold silver bowl filled with glass pebbles. The kind you buy in bulk, the kind that have no memory. The first thing I did was open the windows. The second was to find every artificial scent, every plastic arrangement, every staged object, and place it in a box. I labeled it, "Not mine." Then I moved to the mantel. The frames were all new. Photos I'd never seen. One of my parents on their wedding day. One of Marla with her dog. None of me. Not one. It was strange to realize how thorough they'd been. They hadn't just claimed space, they'd curated a version of life that didn't include me at all. I pulled every frame down gently. I didn't shatter anything. This wasn't anger. It was correction. In the kitchen, tucked behind the silverware tray, I found something unexpected, a cream-colored envelope. My name, written in my mother's cursive. Inside was a single page. "You'll understand someday. Family decisions are complicated. You were always so headstrong, Celeste. This was about preserving what matters. One day you'll see it was necessary. No apology, no ownership, just a tidy set of excuses disguised as legacy." I took it out back, lit a match, and held the paper over the fire pit. The flame curled through each line without hesitation. When it was gone, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. That night, I started rearranging the living room. Not because it was messy, but because it didn't reflect me anymore. I unpacked my own photos. I found the seascape painting from my first trip to Cannon Beach and hung it back over the fireplace. I replaced the bowl of pebbles with the ceramic dish I'd made in a weekend pottery class, the one with the wobbly edge I used to be embarrassed by. I left it as is, imperfect, but mine. By midnight, I had reclaimed enough corners of the house that it no longer whispered their names, and as I climbed into my own bed, the sheets wrinkled the pillows familiar. I exhaled for the first time in weeks. They had rewritten the house, but I remembered the original draft, and now I was writing it back. 3 days after I moved back in, I got a text from Raina. "Brunch at my place, chosen family only. Wear something warm." I didn't bring a gift. I brought a bouquet of pine and cedar wrapped in twine I'd found in the kitchen drawer. When she opened the door, snow was beginning to collect along her porch railing. "Smells like cinnamon," I said. "It's mostly store-bought," she shrugged. "But the coffee's real." Inside, the space was alive. Her sister-in-law was laughing in the kitchen. A toddler dragged a plush bear across the floor. Jazz played low from a speaker tucked behind the coat rack. No one asked what had happened. They simply made room for me. Over cider and eggs baked in ramekins, I found myself smiling at moments I hadn't noticed in years. Tiny things like the way Raina always tilted her head before a question, or how the light from the windows made everything feel warmer than it was. This wasn't the family I was born into, but they showed up without rewriting the story. When I returned home that afternoon, the stillness didn't feel cold anymore. It felt earned. I lit a candle by the window clove and bergamot and sat at the table with a notebook I hadn't touched in months. I wrote only one sentence. The house didn't change. I did. That evening, I replaced the curtains. The ones Marla had picked were too stiff, too long. I hung my old ones instead, soft cream cotton I'd hemmed myself one slow weekend years ago. They didn't match anything else in the room, but they belonged. Later, I found the rug they had shoved in the garage. It was dusty, slightly torn at one corner. I unrolled it anyway. Underneath the hardwood was scratched, some of it from moving day, some of it from the dog I once fostered for a summer. But it was mine. Flawed, marked, and honest. I stood barefoot on the old wood and felt the quiet settle around me like a blanket. That's when I understood. Peace wasn't the silence after a storm. It was the voice you speak in when you no longer need to explain yourself. And that voice, it had my name on it. The next morning, I checked the mailbox. Mixed between utility bills and a holiday catalog was a simple envelope, no return address. Inside a card with a photograph of a snow-covered cabin and one line in block print, "Freedom isn't the absence of history. It's knowing it doesn't own you anymore." I pinned it to the corkboard beside my front door, next to affirmations I had begun collecting. Things I didn't believe in fully yet, but wanted to try. That evening, I wrote a final note in my journal. They tried to take the house, but they couldn't take the woman who built it. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, not out of fear, but out of habit, and climbed into bed with the window cracked just enough to let in the night air. And for the first time in months, I slept without bracing for anything.